Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
The Right Honourable Peter Lilley MP is a long-serving Member of Parliament, a former Tory Cabinet Minister under Margaret Thatcher and John Major, and once a contender for the prime-ministership itself.
Economically conservative and the former Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, we thought we should seek his counsel on where Britain is headed in the wake of the Chancellor's autumn statement and in the face of the siren calls of ruin all around.
I sat with him in Parliament for almost 30 years. He's sitting there still. And I'm glad to say he's sitting with us on board the Sputnik today. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining us. The autumn statement yesterday was a fairly dire set of figures. They are seeking to blame it on the decision of the British people to leave the EU. To what extent is that an accurate analysis, in your view?
Well, I just think it shows that the whole forecasting profession and establishment haven't yet caught up with the fact that they were wrong. They forecast that we should now be in a deep recession with the GDP 3.6% down, 500,000 more people unemployed by the end of the year. And it hasn't happened. And they're only slowly adapting. I used to be in the forecasting business, and I found it very difficult to forecast the future, but it was very easy to forecast how other people would forecast. And it's quite easy to forecast how the things like the Office of Budget Responsibility will forecast. That is to say, they'll halve the distance between what is happening and what they forecast will happen, and forecast that will happen next. And so they're always a bit behind the time.
Forecasting the past, they can, as we found over both Brexit and the Trump presidency, their ability to forecast the present, never mind the future, is, I think, fatally wounded, don't you?
Absolutely. Not that I got it right.
I did on both counts, I must say.
Well, I, for some reason, assumed we were going to lose the Brexit vote, went to bed in despair and woke up in joy. But that's partly that I'm always cautious, and so I prefer to forecast that bad things will happen, and then when good things do, or bad things don't, I feel very cheerful.
Although nothing is ever as good or as bad as it first appears, as we both know. The cost of Brexit, as the media keep telling us, is steadily escalating, just at the moment when it would appear new forces are coalescing to try and scupper Brexit by making it as unattractive looking a prospect as possible and then going for a second referendum. Do you think they're going to get away with that?
No, I don't think they will. And happily, the Prime Minister, although she was on the side of Remain, seems now to have recognised that the British people have spoken, and she's going to proceed and not allow herself to be reversed. And actually, even in the lower house, in the House of Commons, there's a general consensus we'll all vote for triggering Article 80, sending the letter off, starting the negotiating procedure. It may run into difficulty with the House of Lords, but if the House of Lords are too intransigent, they might find they're committing suicide.
Meanwhile, however, this figure from the past, we thought, as we just made a film about him, Tony Blair, seems to return on the stage.
The return of the Blair Rich Project.
Exactly.
How's that going to affect things?
Well, that can only help Brexit, I think. If he's associated with the forces of trying to reverse it, then if nothing else, that will mean that the bulk of the Labour Party will then come on board in favour of Brexit, since he's
going to pose a very big difficulty for the SNP, who are madly Europhile and madly anti-Blair. Are they going to follow the leader they've spent the last decade excoriating and profiting from his excoriation?
That will be wonderful to see them agonising over that. It won't cause me any distress at all, but it might cause them considerable pain.
It's clear, Peter, they're not going to try and stop the Prime Minister triggering the beginning of the negotiations. Seems to me, given the meeting this week between Mr. Blair and your erstwhile colleague Nick Clegg, that they are going to allow the negotiations to proceed, but hope to paint the outcome in such an ugly way that they can get a majority in the House of Commons to put the final deal to the people in a second referendum. I think that's the game. Is that, in your view, a real and present danger? And how do you think people would vote in a second referendum?
Well, they're trying certainly to make it a condition. The House of Lords might well be persuaded to make it a condition of triggering the negotiations that the government agrees to hold a second referendum at the end of the process. I think we'll throw it out in the Commons. But if that were to go through, it would be very damaging indeed. It would undermine the government's negotiating position, because then the European states would just make the outcome as unpleasant as possible. Even if, were it to be implemented, it would be even more damaging to them, in the hope that the British people would then say, oh gosh, that's too dreadful, and come sort of crawling back and ask to be taken back in again. So, that's the reason for not having a second referendum promised at the end of the process. I think that once we've done it, actually, people will think, great, we're now free, now we can get on and do things.
Something like 70 to 75% of the people at this stage don't think we should reconsider in a second referendum. It's a hard core of 25% of the electorate who want to have another go. The problem, it seems to me, for the Prime Minister is that almost the totality of what I would call, I wouldn't ask you to echo it, the ruling elite in Britain, almost all of them are against leaving the European Union. The finance capital sector is virtually 100% against it. A lot of the newspapers and the BBC are against it. It seems to me quite a tall order for the leader of the Tory party to force through a flagship policy against the will and wishes and interests, perhaps, of all the main bits of the Conservative Party's coalition.
Yes, I'm not sure they're all part of the Conservative Party's coalition. You're right, they are the governing elite. They have quite disproportionate influence, and they're largely unelected and self-appointed from the BBC, the House of Lords, and Finance Capital, as you say. I used to be part of Finance Capital. I was a partner of a big finance company in the city. And when the then government, Mrs. Thatcher's government, brought in Big Bang, all my partners, there were 40 of them, almost to a man, said this would be the end of civilization as we know it. And you, Peter, I was sort of just being involved in politics, you must somehow stop it. I said it seemed actually quite a good idea to me. The interesting thing was, it made them all very rich, so that they opposed something which actually turned out to be in their own interests. I was the only person it didn't make rich, because at that point I got elected and became a member of Parliament.
Timing is everything, Peter.
So I think the finance government, they're resisting change because it's simpler to resist change and continue with the system they've got. Once the change has been imposed on them, as in the case with Big Bang, they'll adapt to it and continue to make themselves very rich.
Well, as a certain Dr. Marx said, nothing is as constant as change, and we are now in a period of extraordinary change politically. This ruling elite lost on Brexit, they lost in the United States because all the finance capital was behind Hillary Clinton, all the military-industrial complex, all the newspapers were behind Mrs. Clinton, and they lost. And they lost the Brexit. How far do you think that change is going to go?
I don't know. I certainly didn't forecast it, and so I'm probably not the best person to forecast what will happen next. I find it very hard to think that, for example, Marine Le Pen will win in France, but for the first time it just becomes possible to sort of consider that might happen.
It's already had its first impact, hasn't it? The Gaullists are choosing the most right-wing, if you want to use old language, as their nominee. They're in the process of doing so. Although, paradoxically, I find myself in agreement with him, and with Trump for that matter, on some of the very biggest political issues, like the need to end the steadily growing confrontation with Russia, the need to defeat ISIS and Al-Qaeda decisively, rather than by one means or another actually strengthen them. Are left-right lines being redrawn? Will you and I be comrades at the end of this day?
Well, we were in the Brexit campaign, I seem to remember. We might well do. The extraordinary thing is what has happened, actually, is that the progressive sort of elite who used to work hand in hand with the industrial working class, and they sort of work for them and produce goodies like council houses and so on, and it seemed to work quite well for both parties. That's broken down, and now the progressive elites despise their old power base, and they've just become a coalition of special interests, of minorities, but also of sort of university-educated posh people, and they actually despise the man and woman in the street who used to be the base of their support. And that went on for a while because the man and the woman in the street didn't realise, but it suddenly dawned on them that the people they used to rely on to sort of operate power on their behalf despise them and loathe them. And that's what lies a bit behind Brexit, a lot behind Trump, I think. It's a bit less likely to be the case in France because Marine Le Pen's party's got a long history behind it.
I think the history, the fascist history of the National Front, and indeed the right wing in Germany, probably be significant barriers to them winning. But they don't need to win if they can get some of their agenda adopted. It seems to me obvious, if you create industrial deserts and insultingly call them rust belts, and then expect the people who've been left to live in the Rust Belt to continue to support the very people who presided over the desertification, that's asking a lot, even of a very patient electorate. Isn't that what's happening?
That's what's happening on the economic front. And on the sort of social front, the elites sort of despise the ordinary patriotism, the ordinary working person in America, in this country, and call it xenophobia. And then when they're concerned about a large increase in the population, meaning there are fewer houses to go around and so on, they call that racism. And when ordinary working man or woman wants to sort of own their own home and so on, they're selfish. So it's that sort of contrast of attitudes between the people who've got a lot and feel superior and the people who've only got a little, but have got their old attitudes and values which they find are actually despised by the people above them. That's the big division in society now.
Peter Lilley, pleasure to see you again and to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Coming up next, prepare to get down with it in the grime.
Welcome back to Sputnik.
Hattie Collins is the author of a new book, This is Grime, published by Hodder and Stoughton. Recently on the Sputnik, Daniel Rachel described grime as the heir to rock against racism.
So naturally, we thought you'd want to know more about it. Hence, the author herself is on board the Sputnik. Acclaimed writer for The Guardian, The Sunday Times, and a shelf full of magazines, particularly ID magazine, where she's the features director. I'm glad to welcome Hattie Collins. Congratulations on the book. It's a really beautiful product. The publisher's done a great job with it, I must say. Ideal Christmas present, I'd say.
I would say a stocking filler. I don't know about everybody else.
A stocking filler, a really nice piece of work.
Thank you.
Now, you state that grime is, and I quote, the most significant working class subculture in Britain of its time. That's a big claim.
It is.
How would you convince the viewers of that?
Well, I think it's an incredibly provocative culture. It's a very articulate culture. It has kind of spread from this very, very small, tiny sort of outcrop from the middle of nowhere, really, in East London, from the working class estates of places like Bow in East London.
It's from my old parliamentary constituency.
Yeah, your constituency.
I can't claim any authorship.
Well, maybe you've influenced it in your own way, George. Who knows? And from there, it's spread around the world. You know, you now have like international superstars such as Kanye West and Drake, who are talking about this culture, and they want to be involved in this scene. You have kids in Korea making grime now. You have kids in Japan DJing grime and inviting the MCs over. So, you know, from small seeds has become this really important, powerful movement. It's all driven by a very DIY aesthetic. It's all very young people. most with little to no money at the time that the scene began, and they did it all off their own back, very much in a similar way to punk back in the 70s and 80s.
It reminds me a lot of punk. Not that I was a great fan of punk, but I obviously recognised, and of course now recognise, its historical significance. But it seems to come out of the same housing estates and be marked by the same, as you put it, lack of money.
Well, yeah, there was, you know, this was tough times. You know, when Grime first came to be in the early 2000s, this was you know, a very tough economic time. There was very poor schooling, very poor housing. As the book sort of reveals through it, it's an oral history, so the book talks to not just the people who make the music, but also their parents. So, you know, the book explains there was lots of social problems at that time. Times were tough, and obviously from that comes great art. We've seen that many times.
Well, I take it in these difficult times there was a big lure to gangster as well, of which
I think what a lot of these kids wanted to do was get away from that. You know, yes, of course, there were lots of issues at the time in areas such as this. There was problems with gangs, there was problems with drugs, and what a lot of these young people wanted to do was to take themselves out of that environment and to provide, perhaps even unwittingly, role models to other kids from those estates to say, look, you know, there are far more alternatives to this life. You can make music, you can be an artist, you can go on to be someone like Jamal Edwards, who owns a huge website. You could go on and be like Dynamo, who's a magician. All these people, although you wouldn't necessarily class them as grime MCs, have all come from the same spirit.
What are the defining characteristics of it? I mean, to the people watching this who perhaps don't know some of the things that we know, or many of the things that you know, because you're the expert. If you settled down to sample the grime culture,
what can I expect?
What can you expect?
It's quite loud. It's quite loud, it's quite noisy, it's very energetic. It's characterised mostly by a 140 BPM, which, to put that into some sort of context, it means it's faster than hip-hop. It's more around the sort of jungle, drum and bass, like club music, so it's pretty fast, which means the MCs are sort of driven to rap very fast, which gives it that sort of energy. Yeah, it's very powerful, I think. If you were to experience grime in its natural state, which is in a club, it's enthralling.
So no singing, rapping, yeah?
Yeah, it's rapping. It's all MCing. It's all MCing. So they say MCing, which is different to rapping in its own way. So these are the sorts of things that characterise.
Tell us, what are the differences to MCing and rapping?
Well, rappers tend to rap over slower beats, and MCs rap over faster beats. There's also a culture within grime very influenced by lots of the parents of the scene. Who've come from Jamaica and the Caribbean, of sound clash culture, which is where artists in Jamaica would clash each other. So it's a very sort of competitive. So to get what they call a wheel up or a forward at a rave, you have to sort of have the best lyrics, the best lines. So there's a sort of striving towards that, which again is why they say MCing as opposed to rapping. It's complicated, but the best way to do it, I think, is just to throw yourself into YouTube, listen to as much music as you can, and if you get to experience music live at somewhere like an Eskimo dance, which travels around the country, go and see it live. Eskimo dance, yeah, that's where you'll see the main players of the scene. You'll capture the energy. The audience are brilliant. The audience gets so into it. It's a really welcoming.
Who are the audience? It's interesting that you, as a white woman, wrote this book. Most people, insofar as they know anything about this, will have a preconception that it's a black thing.
Yeah, I think actually it's a common conception. Of course, it is mostly young black boys that do grime, but it's from the East End, which, as you know, George, is incredibly diverse. You know, we have Indian people in grime, you have white people in grime.
So it crosses over black,
really
Asian boundaries,
black and Asian,
as well as black-white boundaries.
Exactly, and male and female. It is, of course, as I said, like mostly dominated by men, but there are brilliant women within the scene: white women, black women, Asian women, Indian women. You know, it's pretty diverse, and without sounding trite and without sort of sounding, you know, just saying it for the sake of it, I've always been incredibly welcome within the scene. I've written about it for a long time, since its earliest beginnings or earlier beginnings, and it's always been incredibly inclusive and incredibly welcoming, because that's what those estates were like. Lots of those estates were very
Now, you yourself raised the issue of women. One of the common criticisms of previous genre is that misogyny, sometimes violently expressed, is a characteristic of those previous genre. How is grime vis-a-vis these gender issues?
I think grime's quite progressive, actually, in lots of ways, and actually also when it comes to the sort of gender issue. I think, you know, people tend to associate grime with hip-hop It's a sort of general thing, but that's actually very different for some of the reasons I explained earlier. And I think, generally speaking, when it comes to women, there's actually a sense of equality. There's very little belittling of women. The videos very rarely show, you know, women in the club being degraded, like the sort of normal tropes we see with American hip hop videos. Actually, there's lots of songs that you'll find the main MCs talking about their mums, their sisters, their partners. Stormzy has his mum in one of his videos. You know, all these sorts of things that people expect to see from things like Grime. They actually tend to do the opposite. You just need to scratch beyond the surface, I think. Lots of people tend to look at it and see lots of young black boys in hoods and assume that it's scary, that it's violent, that it's misogynist. But actually, it's not. You know, you just need to look and
Well,
see
it's
for yourself.
sounding more and more like our kind of thing. We need to get into this.
Go to the
scene.
Eskimo.
We'll do your mixtape. Go to the Eskimo dance, yeah.
We'll get Rob knows this in the Eskimo event. Now, how is it, as it were, monetized? Because it takes money to buy mints. Nobody can indefinitely produce art without earning.
Yep.
How is it monetized? People paying for downloads or buying tickets for the gigs or what?
Yeah, it's changed over the years. Initially, it was from the gigs. They would get bookings. They would sell vinyl. An artist like Wiley, who is widely assumed to be the person that made up the genre, the godfather of grime, would sell thousands of vinyls from literally from the back of his car, from the boot of his car. Obviously, as the time changed, the internet came in, decimated all that. Now, lots of times, artists. One of the T-shirt I'm wearing is a brand of one of the artists called Boy Better Know. They sell a lot of T-shirts. They sell shows out throughout the world. Skepta, who is the brother of the guy who has this T-shirt company, he's just gone to #2 in the charts and won the Mercury Prize. He has endorsements with Levi's, he has endorsements with Uniqlo. So the top tier of artists, I would say, are probably earning pretty well.
So they're becoming a bit mainstream then?
In their own way, yeah. They're becoming mainstream, but they're doing it on their own terms. You know, Skepta isn't signed to a major record label. He is completely independent. He's done all of this out of his home in Tottenham. Wow. You know, a very modest, I don't know, two-bed house, whatever, in Tottenham. That's how this has all emerged.
And so what's the politics of it? If the Rock Against Racism historian feels that Grime is the heir, what does he mean by that?
Well, I think it's getting more and more into the lyrics, but I think just from what I was saying earlier, I think it's very culturally, it's very diverse. Grime's always been very inclusive, so it's been progressive in that sense, in the way that it's just been.
So anti-racist in practice rather than in preach.
And then you look into the music and the lyrics, and especially in the recent years, we're seeing much more of that. We're seeing much more political progression from the MCs. We're seeing them take it from beyond the lyrics to they're going on marches now. They're going on demonstrations on their Instagram, on their platforms. They're using that to post really provocative, interesting political statements, whether that's about Black Lives Matter or the missing women in Boko Haram. You know, these artists are really using their platform for change. It's not, you know, again, it's not about these obvious stereotypes that we hear, that they're talking about money and women and chains and nice cars. It's actually quite different to that.
Now, punk never really made it in the United States. Is Grime making it in the United States?
It would be great if it did cross over. And lots of these big American stars like Kanye are taking a big interest.
Talking about.
You know, you have Pharrell, who's a huge star on Skepta's album, and we're seeing much more cross-pollination between the two cultures. But it now goes down to the American people. You know, it's all very well that the artists like it, but will they actually? I mean, will they understand the language? Will they understand the references to EastEnders, which you know you hear a lot of in the lyrics? Will they understand these references, and do they want to understand them?
Long live the East End,
Always,
London and Glasgow.
And, of course.
Hattie, it's fantastic talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
The very best of luck with the book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So we asked what Britain's post-Brexit strategy is, basically, in trade and industry. And Euroman, an activist, says, we need Article 50 to be activated ASAP, because negotiations are not possible before it happens. Let us respect the referendum. And Phil says the UK government are navigating in the dark without a compass.
Well, the compass is the decision that was made. It has to be implemented. Anyone who seeks to block it will do so at their peril. My own guess is that the EU will be easier to reach a deal with than people currently imagine, because it's not in their interest to have a trade war with Britain.
Well, that's all the tweets that we have for today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on social media, on Twitter, RT_Sputnik, or on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.